Ruska Pravda, Pravda Ruskaya, Russian, Russkaya Pravda, Ukrainian, Ruska Pravda, was the legal code of Kievan Rus and the subsequent Rus principalities during the times of feudal division. It was written at the beginning of the 12th century and remade during many centuries. The basis of the Russkaya Pravda, Pravda of Yaroslav, was written at the beginning of the 11th century. Russkaya Pravda was a main source of Old Russian law, in spite of great influence of Byzantine legislation on the contemporary world, and in spite of great cultural and commercial ties between Byzantium and Rus. The Russkaya Pravda bore no similarity whatever to that of the Byzantine Empire. The absence of capital and corporal punishment rather reflects the Norse way of thought. Additions. 3 recensions of Ruskaya Pravda are known: the short edition, the extensive edition, and the abridged edition. Over 110 extant copies dating from the 13th to the 18th centuries are preserved, included in various manuscripts, chronicles and compilations. Of these, over 100 copies, including the oldest preserved, are of the extensive edition. This code was discovered by the historian Vasily Tatiskov in the text of one of the Novgorod chronicles and brought to the attention of the Russian Academy of Sciences in 1738. The first commented edition of the text was published by August Ludwig von Schlosser in 1767. Nomenclature. The spellings Ruska Pravda or Ruska Pravda as well as Russkaya Pravda or Ruskaya Pravda are used in English language literature. The spelling debate focuses on the interpretation of the word. While Ruskaya with 2 s is easily understood and translated as Russian, the modern Ukrainian viewpoint implies that modern Russia and Rus were different identities. This view was challenged by some linguists on the basis of the language used in the document, who claimed that spelling the word Ruski with 1 s was commonplace at the time. In fact, it is the prevalent for centuries after Ruskaya Pravda was written, and can be found in a large amount of instances both in Kiev and Moscow. An often quoted example is Ivan the Terrible's correspondence from the 16th century. Other linguists claim that the spelling with 2 s's only became more common in the 17th century, and only became standard after Lomonosov's grammar was published in 1755. The term is translated as justice of the Rus, as in the Latin ius Russicum. One may also encounter the translation Russian truth, based on the modern meaning of the word. Genesis and evolution. Pravda Rus'kaya's legal regulations reflected the evolution of the social relations in the Rus of the 11th–13th centuries. Common law, knyaz legislation, and legal proceedings represented the basis of RP. The short edition of Pravda Rus'kaya contains 2 apparently distinct parts, called by researchers Pravda Yaroslava, otherwise known as Drevnaya Pravda of Yaroslav the Wise, and Pravda Yaroslavichi. Some indicate other distinct components of the text, possibly added later. The Yaroslav's law comprised legal regulations of feudal law along with the archaic regulations that could be traced back to the primitive communal system. According to a popular theory, it was promulgated in order to settle a conflict between Constantine Dobrynych, the Posadnik of Novgorod, and the Varangian population of the city. Subsequent development and improvement of the Pravda Rus'kaya took place in times of Yaroslav's sons and his grandson Vladimir Monomakh. New provisions are believed to have been added to Pravda Rus'kaya after the revolts in Kiev, Novgorod, and Rostov-Suzdal province in 1068–1071. In the arising Russian state, the Pravda Rus'kaya was replaced in 1497 by the Sudebnik, the Code of Law. Several centuries earlier, new legal codes were promulgated in Pskov and Novgorod. Institutions. Pravda Yaroslavichi increased responsibility of a given community for killing Nyaze soldiers, RPs, starostas, otroks and other servants on their own territory. Pravda Yaroslavichi provided severe punishment for arson, deliberate cattle mutilation, and collective encroachment on rich people's property. After the 1113 riot in Kiev, an exorbitant interest law was introduced that limited financial operations of money lenders. RP stabilized the system of feudal relations and social inequality. During 11th-13th centuries, RP served the strengthening of feudal dependency of smerds, zakups, kalops, etc. The vast edition of RP contains special regulations with regards to the status of zakups and kalops. RP also reflects the role of the court of nyaz, a trend towards increasing differentiation of punishments and penalties. Larger fines for the benefit of nyaz or his administration, with correspondingly decreasing compensation to the victims. In an attempt to abolish blood feud, RP narrowed its usage and limited the number of avenges to the closest relatives of the dead. If there were no avenges on the victim's side, the killer had to pay a fine in favor of the nyaz and partial compensation to the relatives of the victim. If the woman were killed, one would have to pay half of the regular fine. RP also defended the health and honor of the free members of the feudal society and had provisions about financial compensations for mutilation, or an insult by word or deed. RP had a detailed system of punishments and penalties for larceny in a city or countryside, deliberate damage to forests, hunting grounds or lands, trespassing, etc. It also regulated debt relations between individuals and contained articles of liability and hereditary law. Under RP, legal proceedings included witnesses, use of oaths or orderly. The search for culprits included listening to witnesses, collecting evidence, or hot pursuit. Investigators had to check for false accusations as well. These were the first steps towards forensic science. Excerpts. For the extensive edition 1. If a man kills a man, then a brother avenges a brother, or a son avenges a father, or a cousin, or a nephew. If no one takes revenge, then 80 grivnas for the murdered. If he is a nyaz's man, a nyaz's official. If he is a Russian, or a grid, or a merchant, or a boyar's official, or a mechnik, or an exile, or a Slavianin, then 40 grivnas for the murdered. 180. 42. After Yaroslav's death, there was another meeting between his sons Izyaslav, Sviatoslav and Vsevolod, and the men Koznyoko, Perenik, Nikifor, and they changed the blood revenge for a fine, and the rest of his sons asserted as Yaroslav judged. On murder. 3. If anyone murders a man in a rampage and the villain is not being sought, then the community where the victim's head lies pays a vara of 80 grivnas, or be he a commoner, then 40 grivnas. 4. Whichever community pays the common vara several years, they shall have to pay that, as the members are paying without the murderer. But if the murderer is known to the community, they shall help him with the payments, but only pay up to 40 grivnas, and the murderer pays the rest, and also contributes to his community's 40 grivnas. Or if he murdered by accident, or at a feast, he shall pay thus. Thus shall be on the guilt of rampage. 5. If there be a murder in robbery with no reason, then people shall not pay for the murderer, but give him up with his wife and children, and his property will be plundered. 6. If a person does not contribute to the vara, then the people shall not help him, he shall pay for himself. 7. And such is the law for Yaroslav's vara collector. The vara collector takes 7 buckets of hops per week, also sheep or a meat carcass, a tuno garter, and on a Wednesday cheese and a marten pelt, and the same on Friday, and give him 2 chickens per day, and 7 breads per week, and 7 measures of grain, and 7 measures of peas, and 7 measures of salt. This for a vara collector with a man, and for him 4 horses, which be given a measure of oats, the vara collector 8 grivnas and 10 kunas in fees, and for the page boy 12 squirrel pelts, and a grivna when he goes away, and for each victim 3 grivnas. Of Nyaz's man, 9. If he be a boy, a stable boy, or a cook, then 40 grivnas 10. And for a caretaker, or a horse trainer, 80 grivnas, 11. But for a village supervisor, or the fieldwork supervisor, 12 grivnas. And for a serf, 5 grivnas. Same for boyars, 12. And for a tradesman and a tradeswoman, 12 grivnas. 13. And for a serf, 5 grovianas, for serf woman, 6 grivnas. 14. And for a teacher, 12, same for a nanny, whether they be serfs or women. 17. And if one is accused of murder, but there are no acceptable witnesses, there shall be trial by iron. Thus shall be done for all grievances of thievery, if the accuser cannot provide proof, and the grievance is for less than half of gold grivna, then give him a trial by iron in captivity. If the grievance is for less than that, but more than 2 silver grivnas, then trial by water. If it is even less, then he must make an oath. The law of Vladimir I of Kiev. 48. Volodymyr Vsevolodych, upon Sviatopolk's death, gathered his družina at Berestov. Ratibor of Kiev, the general, Prokopii of Belgorod, the general, Stanislav of Pereyaslavl, the general, Dnazh Miroslav, Ivanok, son of Chudin Boyar of Oleg, and they set thus, to collect interest only until the 3rd payment, if the lender takes the payments in threes. If one takes from the debtor 2 shares, he can ask for the full debt then, but if he collected 3 shares, then will not ask for the full sum. 49. And if one takes from the debtor 10 marten pelts per year on each grivna, that is allowed. If a debtor escapes. 52. If a debtor escapes from master, then a serf, but if he goes to search for money with his master's permission, or goes to the knyaz with a complaint against his master, then won't be made a serf, but be given a trial. On debtors. 57. If a debtor steals something, the master is in his right. When the debtor is caught, the master may reimburse the victim for his horse or whatever else, and makes the debtor his serf, or if the master does not want to reimburse, then he may sell his debtor into serfdom, and reimburse the victim from that, and keep the rest. On witnesses. 59. A serf may not be a witness, but if there are no free witnesses, then a serf caretaker may bear witness, but any others may not, and for minor cases a debtor may be a witness. 65. If one violates land borders, or works somebody else's land, or puts a fence on somebody else's land, then he'll pay 12 grivnas to the knyaz. 69. And if he steals bees, then 3 grivnas to the knyaz, and for the honey, if the beehive was full, 10 marten pelts to the victim, but if an empty hive, then 5 marten pelts. On serfs. 71. If a serf tortures a serf without orders from the knyaz, then pays 3 grivnas to the knyaz, and 1 marten pelt to the victim for his suffering. 72. But if he tortures a knyaz's man, then 12 grivnas to the knyaz, and 1 marten pelt to the victim for his suffering. On barns. 79. If a barn is burned, then the victim's house and property is plundered, after the damage is repaid, and for the rest he'll be a serf to the knyaz. Same for burning of houses. 80. And if one intentionally cuts a horse or other cattle, then he'll pay 12 grivnas to the knyaz, and also repay the victim for the damages. If a serf dies. 85. If a serf dies, then his property goes to the knyaz. If he has unmarried daughters, then some of the property will be given to them for dowry. If all his daughters are married, they don't get it. On deaths of boyars a družina. 86. If a boyar or a družina member dies, then his property does not go to the knyaz, and if he had no sons, then the inheritance goes to his daughters. On serfdom 102. There are three types of serfdom. One buys a serf for up to half a grivna before witnesses, and gives a nogata to the judge before the serf. 103. A second serfdom. If one marries a serf woman without her master's agreement, if he marries with agreement, then whatever they decide with the master, thus he shall be. 104. And this is the third serfdom. If one acts as someone's official or servant without the master's knowledge, if there is an agreement, then whatever they decide, thus he shall be. If he takes the master's tasks, he's his servant. 105. But for a debt of grain, one will not become a serf, but if he does not work it off in time, then he must repay it at once. But if he repays in full before the due date, he's free. Some editions. English translation of short Russkaya Pravda by Daniel H. Kaiser. Source: The Laws of Rus 10th to 15th centuries. Tr. ed. Daniel H. Kaiser. 15 to 19. English translation of vast Russkaya Pravda by Daniel H. Kaiser. Source: The Laws of Rus 10th to 15th centuries. Tr. ed. Daniel H. Kaiser. 20 to 34. Main edition. Pravda Ruskaya. ed. by Boris Gregor. Moscow, Leningrad. Publisher of the Academy of Sciences of the USSR. Volume 1. Texts. 1940. Volume 2. Commentaries. 1947. Volume 3. Facsimile of the texts. 1963. Memorials of Russian Law, ed. by Serafim Yushko. Issue 1. Memorials of Law of Kievan State of the 10th, 12th centuries. Alexander Zimin. Moscow, Gosurazdat, 1952. 287 p.